Diamondlot, The Diamond Squad. By Eric Waugh. Chapter 10. The Seer. The realm of Diamondlot is vast, and there were many regions that had been taken over by the Mad King's army. After conquering a village or town, the Mad King's forces might use the area as a base before moving on to their next target. And there are times when the area gets constructed into a strategic landmark. This area in particular was turned into a prison. Within these prison walls are usually brave warriors who stood up against the Mad King's forces instead of choosing to run away. No one knows for certain why the Mad King does this. Some say he does it so he can use his mind control to convert them to his army. Others say he does it to demoralize others who resist. And then there are those who believe he just does it because he can. At the far north side of the prison was a girl kept isolated from all the other prisoners. There would always be at least 2 guards placed specifically to monitor her station. The 2 orcs were on the latter half of their shift, and one of them was beginning to doze off, so his partner punched him to keep him up. The one who had his sleep disrupted was disgruntled, wondering why they got stuck with babysitting duty. He couldn't comprehend how dangerous one human could be. After his little rant, he finally noticed his partner was nervously pointing at something behind him. He slowly turned around, and as he saw the warden staring down at him, he cowardly apologized. The warden wasn't impressed with their attitude, but he didn't need to say anything. The expression on his face said it all. The guard stood back into position as the warden walked past them and entered the jail cell to speak with the girl. The orc was mocking the girl about her lack of vision, but she replied that she was glad because that meant she didn't have to see the orc's ugly face. The orc felt insulted, but he couldn't do anything to the prisoner because the Mad King wanted her unharmed and alive. She confidently told the orc that he wouldn't need to have to deal with her much longer, as she planned to escape by nightfall. The orc laughed hysterically as he couldn't see how she could possibly escape under her current situation. The seer didn't say anything else, but gave a smile. The warden was no longer laughing, but he still refused to believe what the seer had just said. He turned around towards the exit and he told his minions to tighten security around the prison. As nightfall arrived, a squad of 4 orcs escorted a prisoner that was trapped within a cage. As the cage rolled up to the entrance of the prison, the orcs waiting had a clear look at the prisoner, who was none other than the rebellious Charlotte. Despite being stuck in a cage, her name struck fear into most of the orcs. They were eventually allowed to wheel her cage in, and slowly, the group of guards transported her to her new holding cell. As they were making their way there, one of the orcs decided to taunt her further. Charlotte heard clearly what he said, but she didn't move a muscle or show any change in her expression. Dissatisfied with her reaction, the orc hurled insults about her comrade, the seer, hoping to get her to flinch. When they arrived near the holding cell that was designated for Charlotte, they released her from the cage and made sure the shackles stayed on her wrist. 1 guard stood in front while 2 followed behind. When she walked past the one who stood waiting for her to pass, he tried to aggravate her one last time by telling her that her comrade was on the other side of the prison. Once again, there was no reaction from Charlotte as she continued to follow the lead guard to the prison cell. When they reached the holding cell, one of the guards from the back walked up to the door ready to unlock it. Right when the guard pulled out his keys was when Charlotte made her move. Without warning, she kicked the orc in front of her, which pushed him into the orc unlocking the door. The orc behind reacted by attempting to pull his weapon out, but Charlotte used her shackles and bashed the orc in the face before he had a chance to draw his weapon. She then quickly pulled the key from the orc and undid the shackles on her wrist. During this time, the orc that had taunted her had witnessed how she took out 3 of his allies without breaking a sweat. Charlotte gave him a death stare, and immediately the orc fled in fear, desperately seeking reinforcement. He managed to escape from Charlotte's sight so he could alert the other guards. As he found other guards throughout the prison, he urged them to rush to the cell on the other side of the prison. The instant they left, Charlotte reappeared before the orc that had taunted her. He tried to swing his weapon at her, but she easily avoided his attack, tied him up with the shackles, and locked him on the ground. With the orc pinned down, Charlotte thanked him for revealing the location of her comrade. That was when the orc realized that Charlotte allowed herself to be captured so she could rescue her friend. She locked the orc in a prison cell and continued on her way. The message eventually reached the warden, who was beginning to sweat. The words of the seer from their earlier conversation could possibly come true. With urgency, he rallied as many guards towards the cell on the northern side. As this was happening, Charlotte made her way through the prison using the vents. She followed the schematics she stole from one of the orcs she encountered, and that allowed her to sneak through the area undetected. When she reached the end of where the vent took her, she kicked off the wall vent and dropped herself in front of the prisoner in the cell. The person she had been trying to rescue was right in front of her. She pulled out the keys she stole from one of the guards and unlocked the chains on her wrist. However, they were not out of the woods yet, as they could hear footsteps of reinforcements heading their direction. Seer, the seer, sat down in her meditation form and began to focus. Despite being blind, she could tap into her powers to sense energy given off by living creatures. In an instant, she figured out that there were 43 orcs waiting for them beyond the door. After she relayed the information to her comrade, Charlotte smiled, knowing that this fight would not be close. As they opened the prison door, they could see the warden charging in with his army behind him, holding their weapons up high. Charlotte took a deep breath before storming towards her enemies with a sword she picked up earlier from one of the orcs. Her enemies thought they could overpower her, but they were mistaken. Suddenly, another Charlotte appeared, and then another, and then another. The warden and his army were flustered by the sight of seeing multiple Charlottes, that their movements were hindered, giving Charlotte a greater edge in the fight. In less than 5 minutes, the battle was nearly over. 42 orc soldiers were defeated, leaving only the warden remaining. They faced off at opposite ends of the room and then charged at each other with their weapons in hand. When they met in the middle, Charlotte's sword had completely missed the target, but the warden drove his giant scimitar right through Charlotte's chest. The orc was in disbelief at first, but then he became ecstatic when he thought he had defeated the traitor. After bragging, he realized he still had to take care of Seer, but as he turned around to find her, he saw the blind Seer with a smile on her face. He was confused as to why she was smiling, so he turned around to make sure Charlotte's body was still there, but when he looked, the body had disappeared. The Charlotte that he struck was only an illusion. The instant he discovered that fact, Charlotte performed 2 slashes in quick succession and the warden fell to the ground. After the battle, Charlotte threw away the sword and walked away from her enemy. Seer was about to follow closely behind, but she decided to pay the warden a visit first. She waved goodbye to the warden, who was in disbelief because what seemed impossible before was happening before his eyes. Seer, the all-seeing seer, was now free.